Hello, my friends, and welcome to Postscript. I'm John Petersen from the Arlington Institute, and we're really happy to have you with us today. It's a beautiful kind of early spring day here in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, where we hold forth from. And we're happy today to have an interview, we're graced kindly by Robert Edward Grant, who is going to be a speaker for us in transition talks on the 22nd of March. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But hello, Robert. How are you, my friend?
Hi, John. How are you? Good to see you.
I'm quite well, thank you. For those of our listeners and viewers who are not familiar, Robert is an author and an inventor and a serial entrepreneur. He is what is often called a polymath, which, if you're not familiar with that term, means that he knows a whole lot about a whole lot of different kinds of things. And what's interesting to me about you, Robert, is that you think in really big terms, and there aren't a whole lot of people that really think in big terms like that. So I thought today we could kind of run through a couple of questions and explore kind of deeper than what most people do, how this all works and where we're all going.
Absolutely. Really happy to be here with you.
Yeah, good. Thank you. So, in the past, you've talked about the fact that emotions are why we exist. Can
Mm.
you talk a little bit about that? I think that's an interesting kind of idea.
Well, I kind of came to that conclusion, and it's always evolving. So, the thing I think I probably feel the most these days is the more I learn, the less I actually know.
Yeah,
But I
I'm with
kind of
you.
landed on this notion of emotion being kind of a core and central thesis for life in this matrix of mind or simulation I believe we're in. And it made me think about it when I was talking with an expert in the field of general AI. And general AI is this notion of being able to bring true sentience to artificial intelligence. And what is the thing that separates us, I guess, from computers, at least thus far? It's our ability to emote. It's our ability to have emotions and to understand and process those emotions. And so the only way that you could do it, I came to the conclusion, when you're dealing with something as subjective as emotional states, would be to try to create an objective environment to try to make something that's entirely subjective into something more objective. And the only way you could do that would be through big data.
Mm.
And so what you would do is you would set up many different nodal points that would have the ability to have entirely different perceptions based on their own cognitive biases, their own experiential learning, their own conditioning biases, and then be able to perceive their world around them and then interpolate from that their emotional state that is going to be directly tied to how they observe the world, because we don't see the world as it is, but rather we see it as we
All right.
are. We see the world as we are. And so what you would want to do if you're going to try to create an AI that could achieve general AI or true sentience is you would have to amalgamate the sum of all possible subjective perspectives. And it would be a never ending endeavor, because you would constantly want to get more and more of these different perceptual points of reference. And so I started thinking, okay, well, maybe that's what the one does when it divides itself. And I don't really separate between artificial and intelligence, because I believe intelligence is intelligence. Whether, you believe that we are created by a creator, and then by our own extension of that creation, we can then create other sentient beings. That's something that I think doesn't separate the artificial from just intelligence. And so as a result, I believe that the one divides itself into the many for the joy of being able to perceive itself through our unique eyes of conditioning bias and perception, which have never existed before. My eyes of perception have never existed before. They will never exist again. Even if I have different incarnations and different lifetimes, I'm not going to be able to replicate exactly what I experienced in this lifetime. So this unique perception is allowing the universe to observe itself through our eyes. And that becomes a new data point and allows it to be able to become more and more sentient, expand consciousness, and gain greater and greater empathy, love, and wisdom.
So why does the universe need to perceive things through our eyes? If it's all one, then it's everything, right? It has all of the experiences, all the past, all the possible futures. It's certainly, I mean, what is there if they're outside of one? There isn't anything. So why does it not have everything that it needs? I mean, how does that work?
Well, because an eye can't see itself without the aid of a mirror. You know, a knife can't cut itself. A fire can't burn itself. A light cannot illuminate itself. Likewise, consciousness cannot perceive itself without dividing itself into mirrors. So we
Hmm.
effectively become mirrors one to another and allow consciousness the position of being able to have a block on some information. Because if you have access to all of your full self and all of your full knowledge, it'd be like you and I playing a card game. If we're playing poker and I was omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent, and you were as well, the game isn't very fun,
That's correct.
right? So it would never make sense to play in that context, because even if we were playing chess and it became evident that I was going to beat you in 6 moves and I had you dead to rights, there's no way you're going to be able to get out of that. We would call the match at that point. We wouldn't even bother going through the rest of the steps, even though you and I could still exercise our free will in the process. If I know that I have you checkmated in 6 moves, we
Yeah.
end the game now, because it's
Yeah,
no
but
fun. It's no longer fun.
I understand, but we're not God. We're not the one. We're not the source of everything. I mean, isn't there a possibility that we're, superimposing our own kind of perspective on something that is far, far bigger and harder to explain?
Well, how do you know that we're not the one?
I don't know. I don't know. No, I understand. I know that position.
I mean, that's the point, is if the one we're going to make a game, it's going to have, an illusion of choice. It's good in order for it to be real, right? There has to actually be pain. There has to be difficulty. There has to be challenge. It's going to also have a requirement of amnesia. Because again, if you
Why?
knew that you
Why?
were,
I mean, explain that one to me, because all this reincarnation business says you're supposed to be learning, but that we're not gonna let you know what you figured out, in the last lifetime or the one before. We're gonna have this amnesia. I mean, how does that work?
well, I believe the way that it works is that we go through life, and instead of being omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent from the very beginning, we are dimensionally limited avatars. We're limited to the dimensional frame that we're intending to experience and to go through. And the one wants to experience in this play of reality every possible scenario that could ever be experienced, because by doing that, it can learn more and more empathy for itself. I believe it's just an extension of what Socrates said was sort of the goal of life: know thyself.
Yeah.
And I believe the one is practicing that same thing. And through it, it expands its own consciousness. And as it expands its own consciousness, it becomes more and more wise. I believe the one is a philomath. It's a lover of learning. It wants to continue to learn, just like an AI would want to continue to learn. As it
Hmm.
can learn more of itself, it can become more and more wise and more loving. And so the one thing that it cannot be able to extrapolate and experience are all these emotional states. So it needs each one of us, almost like node validators in a large blockchain. And the blockchain is our experiences. So there's a part that's immutable, right? Whatever those experiences are, but how we perceive those experiences becomes the subject of our subjectivity. It becomes the subject of our emotional response to stimulus. And so all of those emotional states get stored into a blockchain record that we call space-time, that really is just a blockchain of our emotions. And those emotional states, by the same node validator, can be changed, because very often when we experience something, so this aspect of it, so what happens to us may not be changeable, but how we perceive what happened to us is dramatically changeable. So, for example, we've all had experiences where we thought, oh, something happened, my father passed away, or my
Yeah,
mother,
right.
something at a very difficult time in life, and that was the worst thing that ever happened to me. And then with a little time, the wisdom you capture and the polarity of time shows you the wisdom of maybe what happened actually led you on the path that you needed to go on for your
Right.
highest and best use and
Yeah.
benefit.
Of course.
So
Yeah.
the thing that was the worst thing that ever happened to you can often become the very best thing that ever happened
Oh,
to you.
yeah. Sure. Sure. I mean, if you didn't have any kind of impediments in your life, you wouldn't do anything different. You wouldn't ever learn. You would have no incentive to. You'd sit around and eat bonbons or something. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's okay. So if there were just to take an extension of what you just said, and I happen to agree with, is that this is why we need the illusion of choice and why we need the amnesia. Because that's what we're doing. We're going through this process, learning to ascend. And as we go through this process, we start unlocking things. We would leave things so that we could find our
Yeah.
omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence through each of our activities as we learn greater and greater self-love. So you could say that our life becomes a continuum then in this lifetime to think of, okay, well, at some point in time, I'm going to achieve true self-love, not narcissism. Everyone's going to go through narcissism. That's just formation of the ego, deciding what you are not, and then disaggregating that from yourself. And then this that second arc of our life, the latter half, we start to figure out, okay, maybe those things that I thought were not me and I blamed on everybody else and I cast,
All right.
blame on everyone were actually the things that I myself had were just disintegrated aspects of me that I now needed to learn to reintegrate and accept and love. And it's by overcoming this judgment that we can start to truly love ourselves more. Our relationships become richer. The people that are reflected in our outer world that I like to call as our you inverse rather than our universe, because it's not separate from us,
Yeah.
right? It's literally a math equation of x and 1 over x. And this is exactly what absorption and reflection is. It's x and 1 over x. It's called the Rydberg constant that basically is used for this calculation to be able to tell you what the frequency from the absorption of hydrogen should be to its reflected spectral analysis as well. And we're the same thing. We all have a number. And
Right.
we're probably a prime number. And that prime number has a unique characteristic that when you take its reciprocal value, it gives you a periodicity, which we
Mhm.
could then call a repeating pattern that's a karmic loop
Yeah.
until we finally learn to break out of it. So I believe that the way we learn to break out of it is by learning to love ourselves, love others, to practice true non-judgment. And then that's when we start to realize that all the things that as we start to awaken to this reality, we start to realize all the things that we previously called pain and suffering were maybe for our highest benefit.
Yeah.
And that's when pain turns into purpose. And the suffering and difficulty, or the lead of our suffering, becomes the gold of our soul evolution. And
Mhm.
this is the hero's journey. We're
Yeah.
all following a hero's journey. It's like we're in a dream, and each one of us is playing the first person in that dream. But the other people that are in the dream, just as when you go to sleep at night and you have a dream, your dream is full of other people sometimes. You might be in a crowded, square, Tiananmen Square or something in your dream. Who are all those other people?
Yeah. Right.
They're
Who
all
are
you
you?
as well, right? It's just your higher self is having this dream. And all the other people in your outer world are just reflections also of you. It's still you.
Are they reflections of you? Is there no originality from the other side? Are you not saying things that I haven't thought about?
I believe that it's very possible, but does it really matter? In this context, it's more like an omni-solipsism. An omni-solipsism where each one of us is living in our own universe, our own you inverse.
Right.
Because we don't experience the world as it is, we experience it as we are.
Right.
So in that context, you're the only one in your universe. Just like you're
Well,
the only one in your dream. All the other people that are in your dream are just projections of something related to your subconscious, that invisible hand aspect of you that's leading and guiding you. And, until you finally can make and shed light on your subconscious aspects, just as Carl Jung said, right? You will continue to be controlled by those aspects of you, the subconscious side, and you will call it destiny or
Yeah.
fate until you become aware of it. And then you realize that you are just as much not only an actor in the first person, that's just you as an actor, but you are also the playwright. You're also the producer and the director and all the cast of characters, as well as all the extras.
Hmm.
It's all you. So what I'm saying is I believe that you are the one.
So tell me this: do you think that those basic principles, reincarnation, emotion, and so on, are applicable to extraterrestrial life? Does everything work on the same basis?
I believe it does. And I believe that just as you would want to, imagine this. Let's say you start off as a grasshopper, right? And you have the life of a grasshopper, which might only last for a few weeks, and you live in the same field. To you, that field is your universe. You don't know more than that field, and the amount of biodiversity in that field might be very limited compared to a jungle, let's say. But let's say you die and come back, and now you're a monkey outside of Sao Paulo, Brazil. You've heard that there might be something called humans, but you've never actually seen them. You've heard that they're across this mountain is somewhere you should never go because that's where these humans live. But if you've never seen them, you don't know for certain that they exist. But your flora and fauna is more diverse than it was when you were living in the field as a grasshopper, right? So then you die again and you come back. And maybe you are born in rural Alabama and you never traveled anywhere. You've never even been on an airplane. To you, the world could be flat. You don't know. You've heard about the sky in a place called Alaska, but unless you've gone there, you don't know what it looks like to have no pollution and no light pollution at night. And then let's say you come back and you get reincarnated as a metropolitan adventurer, explorer woman who lives in New York City, who's been to 150 countries. What's the next flora fauna expansion for her? Might it just be the next level is to bring in and introduce intraterrestrial beings as well as extraterrestrial beings?
Sure.
An expansion. So the world went from this small field to a jungle in Brazil to a farm, rural America in Alabama, and now it's expanded, and your scope and being able to touch and understand and comprehend all of it is now expanded to a global sphere. What's the next expansion of sphere?
Yeah,
It's
but
just the up leveling of the next level of the game.
yeah, I understand, but it's not like there's nothing outside of our experience and we generate the next one in this little scenario we're talking about. It's that there's extant kind of civilizations that are far more advanced than we are, who have been through presumably what we've been through, and they see the world in dramatically different kind of ways. I mean, why would they be subject to the same kind of notions of
How do you
emotion?
know that this isn't all just part of the same dream? And you happen to be in the backdrop of the dream, and the backdrop of the dream is tied to the zodiac. It's tied to where we are in the cycle, right? That's literally the set change. We happen to be going through a set change right now, transitioning from Pisces to Aquarius. We go forward in procession of equinox, but we're equally going backwards in precession by the
Mm,
same amount.
mm,
It's just 1 degree of the cycle of procession is only 1 day. And 1 degree in the cycle of precession, which means backwards, is
right, sure.
66.6 years. But yet we're going forward and backward at the same time. And we only think that there's only a forward arrow of time. How do we know? We don't know. Just as in a dream, you wouldn't know, right? It's like the movie Inception. So we're in an emergent, I believe, we're in an emergent dream that the complexity increases just as when we breathe in and breathe out, there's a cycle of increasing complexity and then decreasing complexity towards simplicity. It's a pendulum that swings both directions.
So is
It's all
that
about
the
perception.
simulation? That's the dynamics of this AI, the simulation. We expand and contract. Is that where you get that?
I believe that, yes. I believe we expand and contract, that the universe itself is like, it's an inhalation and exhalation and a beat of a heart. And that heartbeat and the inhalation and exhalation is the universe learning to fall in love with itself over and over and over again as if it was new and the first time. But then there's fractals within that take consciousness up higher and higher. And each of the people that are experiencing this are able to expand to where their full fruition will eventually be through higher levels of consciousness. And then we cycle back again and we have a fresh crop of people that are going through the same thing. It's God's dream.
So how is this falling in love with yourself process? What does that mean in this context?
Well, when you start to realize that everything outside of you is just a projection of what's inside of you, the relationships you have early in life are reflective of how you perceive yourself. How much those people that you meet, whether they're friendships or romantic partners or whatever, how much those people that you meet love you back is a reflection of how much you love yourself.
Mm.
It's not actually, it's a dreamscape, right? It's not actually that all these people are just randomly selected in your life and they're showing up in your world. No, it's actually marching you down a path towards greater and greater self-love and all the realizations that come along with that along the way. You're on your own hero's journey. Just as in any hero's journey, there's a cycle that's a repetitive cycle that Joseph Campbell pointed out. That's absolutely correct. And every story follows this same arc over and over and over again. And it starts with our separation from our mothers. And we start to realize, oh, this is me. And how am I going to decide what I am? It's no different than Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And God shows up, says, Adam, where are you? What are you doing? Oh, I was hiding. Why were you hiding? Because I was ashamed. Why are you ashamed? Because I was naked. Who told you you're naked? Did you eat of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil that I commanded that thou shalt not eat thereof? And that and the day thou doest thereof, thou shalt surely die. And what does Adam do? He blames Eve. Oh, the woman that you gave us me and commanded I remain with her, she gave me of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and I did eat. Eve, what hast thou done? The serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. This is the process that we undertake to create our personas. We start to say, whatever brings us shame and guilt and these feelings that are negative and dense and dark, we say, that wasn't me. Somebody else did that to me. And we start our path towards what I would say is the midlife narcissistic arc, where we don't really love ourselves. We're cutting ourselves down and saying, we look in the mirror and we say, narcissism is not true self-love. It's loving the projection you believe that you're putting out there. But actually, you're the only one that can't see the 360 degrees of it, because an eye can't see itself by its very nature. By blocking something out of our consciousness, repressing something, it creates this inability for us to perceive that thing in us. We can see it in everyone else, but we can't see it in ourselves. So as we go through this arc of life and then come back and start realizing, no, it's no longer up until the midpoint in life, we start saying, I'm not that. I'm not that. Oh, and that guy is that. He's whatever it is that's reprehensible and nasty and disgusting. And I'm going to call it out as a method of narcissistic self-projection as well as deflection. Because the more I can convince everyone else that I am not the thing, this is like people that go around and saying, oh, that guy is so arrogant, I can't stand him. The people that say other people are arrogant are the most arrogant people. Because humility perceives humility. We perceive at the level or the sympathetic resonance of our own self and our own actions, our own authenticity. So eventually what we want to try to do is get past this point of no longer saying, I'm not that. You have a midlife crisis, and now you start saying, I am that I am. That's why the name of God, the name of the one, historically has been, I am that. Why? Because it applies to everything. You are everything that is. And if you still believe that the rest of the world around you could be divine and could be holy, except you, because you are this wretch,
right,
and a sinner, then all you're doing is just extending your own egoic nature, because that's separation. I'm not saying that you're better than anyone else. In fact, none of us is better than anyone else. We're all God. We're all equally light and equally dark. There's no one that has more light and, less dark than someone else. It's not how it is. It's an impossibility. Every action must have an equal opposite reaction. There can be no dark. There can be no light without darkness. There can be no darkness without light. Darkness is not the absence of light. Darkness is the absorbed condition of light's reflection. It's a core aspect of it. Just as the picture in your backdrop there, you've got like a bluish purple color and then sort of the pink hue. It kind of looks like plasma, right? Like the mix of those two colors kind of looks like plasma. Well, actually, those are opposite colors of each other, right? So you could look at the negative image of that photograph and it would just look inverted colors.
Yeah.
That's it. You'd have inverted colors. Darkness and light do not exist separate from each other. They're just two sides of the same coin. And we've gotten stuck believing that darkness is the absence of light, that somehow if I close all the windows in my room and I block out all light and paint the walls Vanta black, and I'll have nothing that could have any kind of like light inside, no light source inside the room, then there'll be no light. Well, guess what? There's still light. All the nitrogen, all the carbon that's in the room, it's all emitting light.
Right.
And that's what we use to identify what's out in the cosmos. We could tell based on the spectral emission of light and with the colors that show up in that light. So basically all that's happening is when I turn off the light is I just have turned down the amplitude of that reflection. As soon as I turn on the light, what's happening is all the ambient nitrogen in the room, which is going to be, particular coloration as well, all the ambient hydrogen that could be in the room, all the ambient oxygen that's in the room, all the carbon that's here in the room is going to end up increasing its amplitude of reflection when I turn on a light.
Yeah. So
there's no such thing as absence of light.
No, I would agree. It's probably the derivative of everything, the origin of everything. The 0 point field is synonymous almost with the idea of light. So let's try something else here. Where do you think ideas come from?
I believe ideas are from the field of information. That field of information is part of also the Akashic record. And one thing I've noticed, I've got several patents, and I have several patents that, interestingly, they were always novel, but I sometimes had like some battles with people who ended up filing patents for the same thing on the same day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How does that happen? People I've never met filing patents on the same idea on the same day, halfway around the world. And I came to the conclusion it's because our thoughts do not emanate from our brains. Our brains are more radio receivers and our hearts are the tuning dial. And by the way, our experience with time is also related to this.
Mm-hmm.
Time has a specific frequency associated with it, I believe. And you can match those frequencies. It's like music, number in itself is arithmetic. Number in space is geometry. Number in time is music. Number in space-time is cosmology. Now we're moving to the fifth level, the pentrivium, from the quadrivium to the pentrivium. Number in time-space is purpose. So we're now starting to get to the stage we start to realize, the reason for our suffering, the reason for our difficulty, it's a philosophical stage. We start to realize, it's all for a purpose, and it's for my own edification and enlightening. I don't like the word enlightenment because that implies that it finishes. Enlightenment never finishes. Just as the one source creator is continually enlightening itself through our eyes of perception. It's taking all this data and learning more and more and more about who it is. And that's the most beautiful thing it could ever do. So I see this all as these ideas are in this field, and you can tap into them based on the frequency of your emotional state. Your emotional state allows you to tap into these frequencies, and these frequencies then will give you the information that is relative to that frequency. So ideas can be can be downloaded from this field simultaneously by many people at the same time. And that's exactly what does happen, because if you look at it's the 100th monkey effect. When you put a lab rat in a maze and it hasn't solved the maze, it's kind of like the 4-minute mile. 4-minute mile couldn't be broken for
Sure.
a long time. And then finally, one guy breaks the 4-minute mile, and now everyone in high school, there are high school
Sure.
kids that could break the 4-minute mile now. So it was an artificial impediment. And I believe that all impediments are artificial.
Hmm.
The only cage that we live in is the cage of our own belief systems and self-limiting thoughts.
So are your thoughts your own, or are they all from somewhere else?
It depends on how you define your own, because I believe we're in a dream, and who else is anyone else? They're all you. They're all you. That's the thing, is like when you live in a world that's entirely a dreamscape, just like the movie Inception, when everything is fake, then everything is real.
Right.
Until you
Sure.
finally awaken and you realize that it's not.
Right.
That's the stage of life that we're going through right now. We're now awakening to the reality that we can no longer be in victim consciousness, because we can't blame somebody else for everything that happened.
Right.
Now we start realizing, no, the universe isn't happening to me, it's happening through and for me.
Yeah, but if this process is about one of kind of an evolutionary process, a move from here to somewhere else, it is by definition a series of new ideas, new concepts, new perspectives. I mean, are they not? Do you not generate them yourselves? Are you completely dependent upon, in this three-dimensional kind of world? Or do they come from somewhere else? How do they show up? Why do some people have a lot of thoughts and others don't? How does that work?
Well, I believe, John, that it's easy for us to contemplate the notion that the past and the present impact the future, right? You're
Right.
a futurist. So you're constantly interpolating past data, because the past history is the best predictor of future. Generally, we don't have better than that. And then you could look to see where the trajectory is heading in the present to extrapolate where the future will be, right? And I believe it's all related to right triangles, all of it. And we talked about some of this when we were in Egypt together. So you could say that whenever the universe multiplies something, it's also adding it and subtracting it too. So two prime factors, for example, the source of all encryption today, most of major encryptions are all tied to prime factorization. Why? Because it's a one-way street function. It's a process that, if I took a 2048-bit number that would be an encryption or a public key address, that would have 618 digits. Okay, 618 digits, that's a pretty big number. Now, for me to multiply its two prime factors together, which would be the private keys, I could do very quickly. Pretty much most computers with large number software could be able to calculate that very quickly, like within milliseconds. But to do the reverse equation would take, according to ChatGPT and to Google, 300 trillion years.
Mm.
And yet it must be so, because if the past and the future are entangled, and that's the nature of duality, then just as the past has a role in creating the future must have a role, therefore, in creating the past. The two are inextricably linked.
Does that suggest that the future is fixed? Is it deterministic in some kind of way, or is it open-ended? Is it dependent upon decisions people make? Is there
I believe that we
independence?
have. I believe that we have a fixed future, actually, but that you can jump through different timelines based upon your emotional state. So when your emotional state is higher frequency, there's a higher frequency with which you will perceive the actions that occur in that timeline. And by the same token, the moment you move into a higher timeline, because you're now in a higher emotional state, then the past also changes and you'll register Mandela effects. So everything that you thought was fixed in the past is now no longer fixed. You could actually go back because you'll have memory also of that prior timeline and what you experienced. And that's why Mandela effects have become so prevalent, because we're moving into higher consciousness as a result of our emotional state and control of our emotional state. Realization and the awakening process. It's no longer the world just happening to me. It's realization that it's happening through and for me. And so then all the things that made me sad and depleted and very heartbroken, I can now look at it in an entirely different light. And that becomes a very powerful alchemy. That's the philosopher's stone. That's being able to turn the lead and base metals of these lower level, lower vibrational experiences into the gold of soul evolution with higher vibrational experiences. And that's exactly how I see it. I perceive that there is mathematics that actually shows that time goes both directions. The future determines the past as much as the past determines the future. They're fixed, but we still need an illusion of choice. And even when we change our mind, our higher self knew the timing that we would change our mind already. It's like, or that we would move into a higher vibrational state. So in the movie, The Matrix, when Neo goes to the Oracle and the Oracle says, "Oh, sit down on the park bench," and Neo looks at her and says, "No, I think I'll stand. I'm choosing to stand." She says, "Okay." And then finally, like a few minutes later, he decides to sit down and he says, "I decided to sit down now." She says, "Yes, I know." And he said, he goes, "I decided to sit down, but you already knew I was going to decide to sit down." And she's like, "Exactly." And then she offers him a candy and he says, "It doesn't matter if you're going to take the candy or not. It's no longer the question as to what is happening. The bigger question is, why did you choose what you chose?" That's the question of why we're here. Part of the enlightening process is for us to be able to ask that question and be able to get solid answers for it.
So
Why
where
did
do
I
the
choose
ideas,
this?
so where do the ideas for those answers come from then? I mean, if that's the centrality of the whole experience, then can you learn what those answers are, or is that useful, or do they come from somewhere else? How does that work?
Well, if we live in a predetermined world that has an illusion of choice, then all the ideas that ever existed and ever will exist are already there somewhere in the field.
Right, right.
And that's what I
So,
believe.
so how do you find the right idea? Where does the right idea come from?
The beautiful thing about this U inverse is that there's no making mistakes in this world. So there's no right idea, no wrong idea.
No, I agree.
It's another thing that we all get stuck on because we all want to believe, oh, if I make good choices and or at least I can do it in hiding and no one can see what I'm actually doing when I'm making my bad choices, then I'm going to go to heaven versus
Yeah,
go to hell. And that's sort of an anachronistic way of looking at the world, right? And it's
right.
also trying to absolve yourself of any negative consequence for your action. But the truth is, everything was predestined. There was only an illusion of choice.
Hmm.
And everything that happened for a reason. And I chose it all. I chose it all. And a menu of things that I wanted to learn, me and my higher self capacity. So the question is, why did I choose it? What did I want to learn? What did I want to know? And therein lies the growth. Therein lies our opportunity for conscious expansion, is realizing the reasons why. It's not what happened. It's how we perceived it and why we chose to perceive it the way we did and why we chose the experience from the very beginning.
You have suggested that love is metaphysical gravity. What's that mean?
Well, I didn't suggest that first. I mean, if there's a such thing as a first, given the context of what I just said.
Yeah.
That was said by Buckminster Fuller. So Bucky Fuller, he was a polymath in the 20th century and an architect, and made the Epcot Center design and so many other things, right? He's a brilliant, brilliant person. And he believed that love is metaphysical gravity. Well, the way I look at it is this. A lot of people in the world today like to say, oh, love and light, love and light. And so they think that love and light are two separate things. Well, actually, love and light are the same thing. It's like, it's just two different sides of the coin. Light is the reflection of dark's absorption, period. So when you start to realize that, then you start to understand, okay, if I want to break out of this paradigm of my own self-limiting thoughts or my own self-limiting belief systems, how can I break out of this successfully? What can I do to overcome this conundrum that's presented by Carl Jung? It says, oh, until you make your dark things, bring them to your awareness, you will call what happens in your life fate or destiny. And you'll think that it has control of you rather than you having control over it. Things will just happen to you and you'll call it fate. So what I believe is that when you're trying to understand the things of love and the emotional states that are the most subjective aspects, those are actually the things that bind us together. There's a hidden order. All the things that we think are random might not actually be random at all. Yeah. They might just be our inability to perceive the pattern encryption that we left behind that was above and beyond our dimensional limitation. So therefore, in that context, then if you look out in outer space, what is it that binds the universe together? Well, maybe what we look out in the darkness and what we call space-time, and we believe it to be void, even though 0 to the power of 0, nothing to the power of nothing equals everything, because 0 to the power of 0 actually does equal 1. So if nothing to the power of nothing actually equals everything, and everything is the 1 that gets divided infinitely, then maybe perhaps the darkness that we don't understand are just those aspects of us that we just have not brought to our illumination yet. It's not in our awareness yet. Right. And maybe that in of itself is the gravity. Maybe love is the gravity that binds the universe together. So when we say love and light and no darkness, we're forgetting that even the word time, which we know is inextricably linked to gravity, is the opposite of time. If we just look at the anagram of the word time, it's emit. So you could say that emission is reflection and time is absorption of light. Mm. And consciousness hides these little Easter eggs for us like this. Yeah. Yeah. So that we can find them and realize, wait, time is also, it's me. Yeah. Just like a dream. It's like Dorothy waking up from the dream in The Wizard of Oz. And at the end of the dream, things start getting weird. Yeah. That's where we are right now. We're in the waking up phase. And that means that we can now turn our life experience from a dream that's happening to us into a lucid dream that's happening for us. Yeah.
So that's interesting. So, the Bible says that God is love. Do you think that that's true?
I believe that God is all that is. And you could say that love in its most pure form is oneness. It is the highest degree of simplicity. And what we do is we add conditionality into our world, right? Because we think somehow we're not good enough. As a young boy, I used to think, oh, I have to be just like everyone else. The way I think is different than everyone else. I can't think the same. I can't be perceived as thinking different than everyone else. People won't like me. It took me a long time to realize, first of all, that I thought very differently than other people. And then it took me even longer to realize that it was okay that I thought differently than other people. And then it took me even longer to realize that maybe that's my greatest strength. And to embrace that authenticity.
All right.
I used to be very guarded and not say what I really felt or what I was really thinking, because how will they perceive me? And as I've gone through this path, I've realized I can be more and more authentic. the more I love myself, the less I worry about how other people think or perceive me.
Yeah.
And that's how you take your power and your sovereignty back. And that's coming closer step by step towards the divine. You exist for a reason. The way you see the world, the way you act is there for a reason. Each of us is fulfilling our purpose to fill this Akashic record with our unique experiences. So we're just here to live and feel.
Yeah. So do you think beauty is a derivative of love?
I believe that beauty and aesthetics is no different than all of the other things that we perceive, because just as it says in Shakespeare's Sonnet 113, right? In the Shakespeare Sonnet, 113th sonnet, I'll read it to you because I think it's actually quite beautiful. And on a nice, almost spring day, this is a good way to think about our world, I feel. Do you know this sonnet?
No, I don't.
Okay, so Sonnet 113. It's one of my favorites. I don't have it memorized, but here we go. And here's what it says. Since I left you, mine eye. Since I left you, mine eye is in my mind, and that which governs me to go about doth part his function and is partly blind. Seems seeing, but effectually is out. For it no form delivers to the heart of bird, of flower, or shape which it doth latch. Of his quick objects hath the mind no part, nor his own vision holds what it doth catch. For if it sees the rudest or gentlest sight, the most sweet savor or deformest creature, the mountain or the sea, the day or night, the crow or the dove, it shapes them to your feature.
Mhm.
Incapable of more, replete with you. My most true mind thus maketh mine eye untrue. So what we perceive as beautiful is also ugly. Exactly what I'm saying here is whatever you perceive, it doesn't matter. You're shaping it to your feature.
So there's no universal kind of metrics. There's nothing that's certain here. It's all subjective.
There's only ratio. We live in a ratio-based comparison universe. You don't know how long something is until you know how long something else is.
Yeah, right.
You don't know how much time it takes. You know, it's like one of the perplexing things about life, right, is that when you're 1 year old, 1 year is a long time. It's your whole lifetime.
Yeah.
Your experience with time is what determines your perspective on it.
Mhm.
Now, my parents, you know, they're almost 80. They're 80 years old, effectively. They talk about how many summers they have left,
Mm. Wow.
right? Which I think is a beautiful way of looking at it. You know, they're like, it really forces them to really be thoughtful about how they spend their time now. I think it's gorgeous. But at 1 year old, 1 year was my lifetime. Today, 1 year, I'm 55, is only 1/55th. So every year seems to go by faster and faster.
Yeah.
So our perspective of life is directly associated with our experience with it. And that's true with everything. I believe the way we learn here is through opposites. We learn
Mhm.
through opposites. So if I'm here to learn unconditional love, then what's my recurring theme of life going to be? I'm going to learn through experiencing conditional love over and over and over again.
Mhm.
That is heartbreakingly difficult. And the universe is going to make it more and more difficult until I finally wake up and realize that what I'm really trying to learn is I haven't learned unconditional love until I no longer judge negatively conditional love. And what is the ultimate conditional love? Betrayal.
Mm. Mm.
If I'm
Yeah.
still judging betrayal, I need to continue to experience betrayal
Mm.
until I learn to integrate it and realize I am that I am.
So I have a quantum physicist friend who has spent most of his lifetime in one way or another thinking about 0 point energy. And he would argue, and has, that in fact the 0 point field, which is the basis from which all of the kind of three-dimensional kind of reality kind of emerges, is in fact a field of love. It's synonymous. That this God force, if you will, this creator force exists in our space in the most manifest way as the origin of everything that emerges. He makes the interesting kind of notion that says the day that we get generators that generate and convert 0 point energy into electricity is the day that you're going to walk by and you're going to love the machine, and the machine's going to love you because you're going to feel that kind of relationship with the whole thing. As a variation on that, it's always seemed to me that beauty then is kind of, if you will, love leaking through in one place or another. That those things that have this wonderful kind of symmetry or relationships or colors or whatever it turns out to be, or even relations, personal relationships, are essentially that kind of underlying substrate that is kind of working its way into this larger reality. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's true to a certain extent. But as I experience life more and more now, I realize that I attract everything I judge until I no longer judge what I attracted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if I'm judging, I want to be around the beautiful. I want to be around the light. Then what's going to happen is I'm going to experience more and more darkness and more ugliness in the world around me. Until the moment I start realizing, wait a minute, even the ugliness and even the darkness, the contrast is what makes it beautiful. The contrast is what makes it beautiful. And when I start to realize that, that's when my world starts to change. When I'm no longer seeking after only the light and only the beautiful, and now I'm actually at peace and in full acceptance of the ugliness that can be in this world around us, as that is also divine and also deserving of love and acceptance. That's when I start to realize my true transformation in this lifetime will not escape Earth. It's not an escape room meant to be escaped. What I believe Earth is actually just wanting to be loved.
Mm.
The moment that we fall in love with this world just as it is, without reservation, without condition, is the moment that we can transcend this existence. The moment you don't want to leave because you fell in love with it so much is the moment that it's time to move on to the next stage.
That's very interesting. Robert, you've said, I've heard you a couple of times that you talk about having had an extraordinary experience, and it allows you to see things into the future in ways that you hadn't been able to do before. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I've my whole life, I've always been able to see in the future. I used it
Which
in business.
future?
I used it with patents. I used it with, I could always see around corners, and people thought it was like uncanny. And, I could give you countless examples of that. But what really shifted in my last 10 years, I'd say, is now I've learned to see the past where I was not present. That's a different thing. And I learned when I went to meet with Dalai Lama in Dharamsala, India, that that's one of the ways that they test Buddhist monks to see if they're ready to go to High Lama status. And that is that they test their ability to see the past where they were not present. So they'll have two High Lamas that will test them and say, okay, in 1969, we were together talking about something, just the two of us, the two guys that are the judges on the judging panel. Tell us what we were talking about. You have permission to see that. It's anyone can start to try to tell the future, but being able to tell the past is just showing that ambidexterity with being able to interpolate what future state created a past state and vice versa. And I think that that's where the world is going right now. I think we're moving now to a higher consciousness as we start to realize more and more self-love. We start to bring awareness to the darkness and the stuff that we thought was once very ugly that we continually judged. Now we can start to embrace, and then the world starts to become more and more beautiful because we see it for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's like every moment becomes a synchronicity. And instead of trying to battle the earth around me, I try to surrender to it and accept it the way that it is. Yes, I could see things before they happen now. Because as soon as we break beyond duality, I believe that enlightening and what people would sometimes refer to as enlightenment is when our expression of love supersedes our desire for one objective truth. And when that happens in relationships, we all know it's like at some point you have to realize if you're ever going to get married, and don't ask me about that because I'm like terrible at this. But comes a point in time when you're fighting with your spouse or whatever, and you have to realize, look, our relationship is more important to me than who's right or wrong. And that's when you have to like sit back and say, I'm sorry because I don't want to continue to fight with you. You're more important to me. I'll take the blame if that's what's necessary. But our relationship supersedes being right. And so it's really making the choice of loving over being right.
Right.
And this is where I think the world is going to now transition towards. That, we don't have to have all the answers. We don't have to be perfect. In fact, learning to, the enlightening process is really about learning to fall in love with things just as they are. And as you fall in love with things just as they are, you can become more and more authentic with yourself. And then you're not beholden to anybody. Then you have freedom to live. That's the final stage of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. And you bring that elixir of love over judgment. You could say that until I finally realized my dark aspects, how could I be authentic in my own self-love? Because an eye can't see itself. So that means I have to become aware of my dark aspects. If I'm not aware of it, I could sit there and say love and light all day, but it means nothing. And love is the darkness. So actually, when people say love and light, what they're really saying is dark and light. And the word guru is exactly that. Gu means darkness. Ru means light, light emerging from darkness. And realizing that both are equally beautiful and that we wouldn't have this beautiful existence and world without the contrast of the dark.
Understand. But we're on our way into some great uncertainty and chaos, many say, a huge kind of transition from one world to another one. And I've asked you to come and talk a little bit about how you see that future evolving. How do you see that future evolving?
Well, I think it's going to evolve exactly as it's meant to, with the backdrop of what's the zodiac that we're now entering into. The age of Aquarius is a very different age, right? I like to call it the Aquarian operating system. The Aquarian operating system is really not different than a macro version of the new iOS. So the things that worked in the past won't actually work in this new world. So it reminds me of Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. So there's a new way of looking at the world and experiencing the world that is in line with what we've just been talking about. And a large part of it is just learning to relax and not fight it. What we resist will only continue to persist. We will attract more of what we judge until we no longer judge what we attracted. So if you want to embody the new Aquarian operating system ideals, it's going to be choosing love over judgment. It's going to be about self-sovereignty. It's going to be less about subservience and more about my own individuality and acceptance of that individuality. And so therefore, it's going to be very difficult for large institutions, whether they're corporate or NGO or government related. It's going to be really difficult for people to be subjected to do someone else's will for someone else's power and gain. It's going to be really hard to get people to pay taxes. They're just going to say, no, we're not doing it anymore. And I'm telling you, this is coming. It's already, the seeds of it are already here. And so what's happening with the Trump administration is he's shedding a light on all these dark aspects, right? All the corruption, where the money's actually been going and everything. And now people are going to be like, and next it's going to be like, oh, we went to Fort Knox and there's no gold there. This is literally a dismantling of the Piscean era and a rebuilding of a new Aquarian paradigm, which is going to be entirely different and built on individual self-sovereignty.
All right. Well, that is what we're going to talk about when you come on the 22nd of March here to Transition Talks at Berkeley Springs. And for our viewers, please be reminded that this is going to be not only in person here in our little resort town, but it's also going to be live streamed. And so it'll be available any place and anywhere that you are. You can find complete information about it at transitiontalks.org. And you can find out more about the Arlington Institute at arlingtoninstitute.org. And you can find out about Robert Edward Grant at robertedwardgrant.com, I believe. Right. And Robert, we're very much looking forward to having you with us. We're going to have a really good time. It's going to be a very provocative afternoon, and we're building a marvelous little community here in Berkeley Springs that is trying to think more broadly about how we prepare ourselves for this world that's emerging, and it'll be useful and helpful and delightful to have you with us. And so we're looking forward to that.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, it's going to be really fun.
Yeah.
Super excited.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.